Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining this deep dive session, which is hosted by CrossBoundary Innovation Lab in partnership with Transforming Energy Access platform. My name is Helida Wagude, an associate at the Innovation Lab, and I'm joined by Tombo Banda, our Innovation Lab lead. We wanted to host this session following the launch of our second latest innovation insight, which explores the potential of mesh grids as a versatile and cost-effective approach to rural electrification. In this session, we'll start with a brief overview of CrossBoundary's mini-grid innovation lab, which Tombo will take us through. It'll include what we do and the challenges we are trying to solve across the sector. Then we'll introduce the concept of mesh grids, just exploring why they matter, and share early findings from our recent field tests. We'll also hear from developers, technology partners, and investors, and just get to have an open discussion to end it all, exploring what this means for the sector. So I'll hand this next section to Tombo just to take us through the lab.
Great, thanks, Alida, and hello, everyone. Lovely to be with you all on this call on a Friday afternoon. So to introduce the lab, the lab is an R&D engine purely dedicated to mini-grids. So our mandate is to test and scale innovations that improve the mini-grid business model. This, in combination with working with partners such as AMDA, help to unblock barriers, including regulation, and drive investment into mini-grids, such that over 260 million people across the continent, for which mini-grids are least cost technology, can get access to reliable and affordable electricity. Next, please. Yeah. So to give an idea of our footprint and the work we're doing across the continent, we are working with over 27 developers in various geographies. We have field tests live in over 120 sites, spread across more than 9 countries now. And these prototypes include revenue increasing interventions such as appliance financing and tariff reduction, and also cost-reducing technologies such as second life batteries, and the topic of today's discussion, which is mesh grids. So what do we do with all the data from the field tests that we conduct? So we collect data from all these field tests. So that's smart meter data, battery data, inverter data, survey data. And we conduct analysis on this data to give a real-world evidence-based view on what the impact of these various innovations are on the mini-grid business case. So our most current analysis suggests that implementing all these various prototypes, including mesh grids, brings the mini-grid business case to an IRR of about 9.5% today, which is closer to our target of 12%. We have set a target of 12% so that mini-grids are on par with other infrastructure investments. So, while we're not quite where we need to be, we see that mini-grids present an opportunity for further improvement and brings us closer to a more lucrative business case for mini-grids overall. So today we hope to take you through our findings from mesh grids, and discuss how these might further impact the mini-grid business case. Thanks. You're muted.
Thanks, Tombo. Yeah. So before we dive into what mesh grids are and how they work, we'd like to get a sense of your perspectives through a short live poll. So I'll be launching the poll shortly. And here are the questions that you can answer. It should take you maximum 2 minutes or 1 minute to just get through the 3 questions. Then once everyone has answered them, we can launch the results. There. I hope you can see it on your sides. So this is just to help us get a sense of your familiarity with mesh grids, if you've done any work with them, and what you see as promising use cases for them and enabling environment. So still getting responses coming in. We're at 16 responses. Great, let me share results so far. Yeah, so we can see around 37% of you say that, yeah, you're somewhat familiar with mesh grids, you've explored them and are following early pilots. 26 are very familiar, you've deployed them and are actively working with mesh grids. 26% are aware and 11% are not familiar. Yeah, so this is your first introduction to mesh grids. Then for the other question, what do you see as the most promising use case for mesh grids? Full community electrification in remote areas is a winner, and grid extension in hard to reach or low density zones. Yeah, so the one lagging behind is temporary power for mobile or disaster response sites. Then on to the third question, what do you think is the most important enabler for scaling mesh grids? So the leading one would be just the proven technical reliability and performance of mesh grids, and following up with access to affordable capital, then supportive regulation and policy. Great. Thanks everyone who participated. We can jump back into the discussion. Great. Let me just share my screen. There. Yeah, so on to our next one. I just wanted to take you through an overview of what mesh grids are and what they consist of. So in the past 2 years, the lab set out to test the technical and financial viability of mesh grids, and we compared them to mini-grid deployments of similar scale. So we ran pilots at 2 sites in Nigeria, one with full deployment of mesh grids across an entire community. And here we used a hub and spoke model where the hub serves as a central node and supports high energy users like shops and clinics, while neighboring households connect as spokes, as they typically use less than 1 kilowatt hour per day, mainly just for lighting and charging small appliances. Then the second site that was tested used mesh grids to extend access to a community at the edge of an existing mini grid, and each household had its own panel and battery system. While this is a limited sample size, the findings we felt pointed to important trends that can inform how developers, funders, and policymakers think about where and how mesh grids might be a viable solution. Both mesh grid sites were launched as alpha tests between 2023 and 2024. And over this period, the lab worked closely with the developers and technology partner to collect operational data, including ARPU, average consumption per user, average revenue per user, reliability, CapEx, and OpEx per connection. So these particular metrics were to better understand how mesh grids perform in practice. So taking you through the findings of the different sites. At the full deployment site, CapEx per connection was lower than at the mini-grid site. And we also noted that it was 23% lower than mini-grid benchmarks in West and Central Africa. This is from the latest AMDA report. Distribution CapEx was also low, and factoring in poles and cables, the true cost is around $30 per connection. OpEx per connection was higher at this site compared to the mini-grid control, and this was largely because the site required dedicated maintenance resources, which hadn't yet been optimized given that it was a relatively new site. In contrast, at the extension site, CapEx per connection was higher than at the mini-grid site, and this is because the mini-grid site already had existing PV and battery capacity, so only distribution infrastructure was required. The mesh grid extension site also had lower distribution CapEx, and this is driven by the use of thinner conductors and less infrastructure. OpEx per connection was also lower thanks to shared operational services with the nearby mini-grid, considering this was the same developer. When it comes to ARPU and ARPU, both mesh grid sites maintained competitive revenue despite lower ARPU. The mini-grid sites, having operated for a longer period, have benefited from gradual demand growth over the years and are better positioned to support productive use or income-generating activities. So this typically drives higher consumption than what we currently observe at the mesh grid sites. Both mesh grid sites also applied higher tariffs than the mini-grid sites, and this is largely because mesh grids in Nigeria still remain unregulated, while mini-grid tariffs are capped by regulator-approved rates. So that gives developers more pricing flexibility to recover costs and improve margins. When it comes to the speed of deployment, it was noted that the ability to deploy mesh grids connections varies according to developer operations. The full deployment mesh grid was generally faster to deploy compared to the mini-grid control site because panels, batteries, and pods are installed on individual houses without the need for extensive infrastructure for the power distribution. In contrast, the slower deployment speed observed in the extension case reflects the added complexity of the mesh grid extension site configuration, where each household has a PV panel, and this can impact the installation and commissioning process. When it comes to the reliability, an encouraging finding was around this, where both mesh grid sites achieved over 96% reliability. This is largely due to their decentralized design, where generation and storage is distributed across multiple nodes. So local outages tend to be contained and don't result in full system failure. Mini-grids, on the other hand, rely more heavily on centralized components, like we know, so batteries and inverters, which become single points of failure. The longer operational history of the mini-grids, where we have 4 years and 15 years for the different sites, also means they are more susceptible to wear and tear compared to the newer mesh grid sites. That said, the mini-grid sites did report high reliability above 93% during their first 6 months post-commissioning. So it will also be important to continue just monitoring how mesh grid reliability holds up over time. We thought we'd take you through we thought we'd look at a case study of mesh grids which have been deployed in Haiti since 2021. So with more than 46% of households in Haiti lacking access to electricity, many communities remain entirely off-grid and rely on wood, charcoal, candles, and kerosene lamps for basic energy needs. Alina Elneji launched this mesh grid project in the rural community of Marchand de Salin and has been expanding to other locations. Alina Energy is demonstrating how innovative decentralized energy solutions can bridge Haiti's energy gap faster and more affordably than conventional infrastructure. The site has demonstrated quite high uptimes and reliability of over 98% and above through this period, while keeping cost per connection low at $545 per connection and charging tariffs that are over 90% cheaper than what customers pay in informal charging stations. So we now want to just highlight some of the key takeaways and opportunities for collaboration that we see as the lab. In terms of key takeaways, we're seeing that mesh grids are emerging as scalable and cost-effective solutions, especially in areas where extending mini-grids might not make sense. The hub-and-spoke model is also proving to be an efficient way to extend energy access, as it provides flexibility for developers while still meeting the needs of different customer types. The ability to provide sufficient power for productive use of appliances is also being tested, as the typical individual system provides around 1.2 kilowatt, while high-power machinery such as grain mills would need around 2 to 6 kilowatts, which exceeds the capacity of standalone mesh grid systems. And finally, we're also looking at their performance, which has been promising, but we'll need to continue monitoring the long-term reliability and durability of mesh grids. So looking ahead, the lab is continuing to track performance data on mesh grid systems, especially around key questions and areas like how the systems handle productive use, what their cost effectiveness is over time, and how reliable they are as they age. So we do invite more collaboration, as we believe there's huge value in just bringing more data from other partners and participants in the field. So for our next section, we'll be entering into the where we just listen to developers, technology partners, and investors who will be sharing their insights while working with mesh grids. So for the developer viewpoint, the first developer call up is from Engie. That will be Chima and Matilda. Maybe you can start with introducing yourselves, then we can jump into the questions.
Thank you, Helida. My name is Chimobi Meyer. Now at AMDA as the regional coordinator for West and Central Africa. But before joining AMDA, I worked at Engie Energy Access, where I was the project manager of this project from the beginning to the end. Yeah, thank you. Very happy to be here. Okay,
thank you so much, Chima. Yeah, so we'll jump straight into the questions. So the first one we have for you was just, we would really love to know what your experience was installing mesh grids on your site.
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate to have been involved in the deployment of many projects here in Nigeria, from the mini grid to interconnected, as well as undergrid mini grid. But I can also say that this particular project was it was challenging in the sense that it was the first, more like a pilot that the company was doing at that particular time. So it was actually challenging and also a bit dynamic, considering the time factor, because Nigeria was more like at a transition period. Right, so the conversation started late 2022, and we started deployment early 2023, which was actually close to election period. So there was a lot of issues, sincerely speaking. But due to our fantastic relationship with the lab and also with the technology partner, Okra Solar, we were able to navigate all the challenges. And even I can beat my chest and say that it was a record-breaking one, because what we expected, we matched it and even went above and beyond when you look at the timeline, and also when you do the comparison with the challenges that we faced. So it was, I can say it was a great one. A lot of learnings that came with it, being the first project of Mesh Grid by the company. So we're able to navigate all of them. But I think it was actually challenging, but a great one at the end of the day.
Thanks, Chima. Yeah. So for the next one, we just wanted to know how your team managed customer engagement, and did you need to educate communities prior to connecting mesh grids?
Yeah, definitely, which is associated with rural electrification, any rural electrification projects. I think that's one of the most important steps that you must follow. Stakeholder engagement, because you're speaking with people that are not so educated. So you have to lower yourself down, right? Look at the language barriers. You have to also, I think that's one of the most important side of it. So for us, we were able to, because we have, ONG has a very fantastic structure whereby we try to even have local staff at the lowest of the lowest level of our business. So we have a very active community engagement officer, whereby we try to recruit them from the rurals, where they can speak the language, they know the terrain. So they will give us that opportunity and also give us that advantage as well. So it was a great one. We try to, we have like a criteria list that we follow, whereby we have to follow this process. So the engagement was actually good. We started from the local council, where we discussed with the government at the local level. Then we went to the village chief, and then one thing that we do is that we try to form a village power committee. So we created a village power committee, whereby we don't have to speak to all the villagers, but we have to speak to the committee so that it will be more efficient. So we created that committee, and the collaboration and engagement was actually straightforward, very clear. They accepted us in good faith, and the deployment was carried out. Just one or two grievances that we noticed. Maybe as we go deeper, we're able to identify them, because you remember that this was a study test. So questions were raised on the issue of, why are you coming with a mesh grid, which is an interconnected solar home system? Why don't you give us mini grid that we are seeing 10 kilometers away? So in terms of appearance, I think they are more appealed by the presence of mini grid, like the charisma, the in Nigeria we call it packaging, right? So so we're able to, that's why you have to engage further, right? So we engage to convince them, and at the end, I think it has been a very fantastic project. And I must also give thanks to Malam Abubakar. I can't forget his name, who is the village head, a very fantastic chief. He gave us his support. He was one of the first people that paid the connection fee and accepted us to connect his household, and he paid immediately, right? And that was more like a morale booster in the village, where if they see their village chief connecting, then they have to connect, right? And also we also try to have a sense of gender balance, where we made it a must that there should be women representation, right? Because when in Nigeria, local setting, look at the cultural context, you have to follow some procedure, but we were able to get a balance. Village women leader was part of it, just to make sure that everybody, all the necessary stakeholders, are carried along.
Yeah, thanks, Chima. Yeah, so on to our next one. We could go and handle this two at the same time to save time. Are there specific factors such as geography or community size that you feel make mesh grids more or less viable for you? And yeah, you did though highlight already the challenges you were facing, with deploying mesh grids.
Yeah, definitely. I think I mentioned it earlier. When you are dealing with rural electrification project, especially mini grid, mesh grid, I think one thing you have to get right is your site identification and selection. I think if you get it wrong, you are in trouble, because for you to be able to reverse the mistake, it will cost you a lot, even if you succeed at the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one principle that we followed at NG back then. Fortunately, I'm no longer with the team, but it was more like a core principle that you must get that side of that step very correct. So we try to find a balance at the end. But one thing I will advise is that mesh grid as a solution can power the communities, right? As well as mini grid. So the two technologies, they must be there. One cannot be eliminated. It's not possible. And let me give this analogy. So let's say because of the existing limitation in the mesh grid, right, which we all know is on not being able to power productive use. So if you go to a community so large, which is one characteristic of a large community in Nigeria, is that you will see the presence of existing local value chains where you see milling machines, right? Then I can say that community is not an ideal community for mesh grid, but rather for mini grid. Because why putting a mesh grid there? I don't think they are aligned. So you have to find maybe more like a little community, lesser than the normal standard. So for us as NG, we normally look at community from 250. You have to go for mini grid. So less than 250, then we have to look at mesh grid. That was like our internal principle back then. Yeah, so I think you have to look at other factors where maybe security is another key factor. Communication, telecommunication, because there has to be communication across your site, be it mini grid or mesh grid. So we make sure that we have a telecom mast, either MTN or Airtel, anyone, but let it be there, no matter how low it is. There is always a way to navigate. Yeah, then find a balance on your commercial activities where the mesh grid technology can be able to power. So I think it's a very, very important aspect to look at, because once you get it wrong, I think it will be a very difficult task to change at the end, because we are looking at profitability at the end of the day. I don't think there is any business just going to dance rather than to make money for the unnecessary stakeholders.
Yeah, thanks, Chima. Yeah, and on to
yes, on the challenges, yes, like I mentioned, our deployment came at a period of time when Nigeria was entering into a new government, the government of President Bola Tinubu, right? It was around that period. So I don't know if my fellow Nigerians can be able to remember that there was a very critical issue then, which was the absence of Naira. Suddenly, Naira disappeared. It was funny, but many say that it's politically motivated. I don't know, but there was scarcity of Naira back then. So it was a very big challenge, right? Where we try to figure out the ways to, because, if you don't have cash in project development, it's always difficult, because even if you try to look at, digital payment, remember that you have local staff in the villages that in one way or the other, you have to also try to pay. There are some payment that you must make in cash, right? Then also challenges on transportation at the port. It was difficult, and I must give kudos to Okra Solar team. We faced it as a team, and we're able to cut that down in a very fast manner. So I think these were the two major challenges. Being a new product, the deployment was a bit slow at the beginning, right? Which wasn't a surprise, because we are just trying to be careful not to make big mistakes. You have to train the technicians across in the sites, just to make sure that everything goes well. Yeah. So, but within few days, we're able to pick it up quickly. Yeah. So I think these are like the three major challenges that we faced back then.
Okay, thanks, Chima. Thank you so much for that in-depth analysis. So I think we can move to Sunkami, that's from Haven Hill, just to also hear your thoughts.
Sorry,
Hi, Sunkami. Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
Helena. I think the last question, or you want me to skip?
Oh yeah. So if you could answer also the last one. What improvements or support do you think would help?
Yeah, definitely. So let me say 3 sites. I have 3 points to make on that, which I think we've already mentioned. On the side of the PUs, there is limitation because of the low capacity when you compare to mini grid. Remember when I make that explanation on if you have a bigger site, then I don't think mesh grid should be a priority. So I think there is need for the providers to look at that. Also, on the health and safety, I think there is also need. I think Okra Solar is already addressing that. But when you look at the technology, especially on the structures, physical outlook, I think there is need to make an improvement on the HSE side. Then on the regulation, I think I'm in between, but I think there is need to have a bit of regulation guiding it. We know the advantages of something being regulated. I don't know, but I think there should be a way. I don't think it will come anytime soon in Nigeria, looking at the capacity, because these are like some of the conversation I have had with the regulator NEC in Nigeria. But also, my concern is on the side of grid encroachment. What happens if you deploy, let's say you go and deploy in a community of 2,000 connection and the grid encroaches? Is there any form of compensation coming to you? Absolutely nothing, because it's not regulated, right? But others can argue that on the other end, that these are systems that you can quickly pack like solar home system and then move. Yes, but if you look at it deeply, I think there is need to have some level of regulatory oversight on the operations. Yeah, then also maybe on the side of financing, maybe going straight to REA, where they have capped the RBF at 300 USD per connection, and that on mini grid going at above 300, a maximum of 600. Many can argue that why can't mesh grid also go for 600 maximum? Why capping it at 300? So if these stakeholders can actually look at things like this, just saying, but I think these are like some things that can also improve the bankability of this particular technology, like in terms of adoption. Yeah, so let me stop here. I'm happy to take any question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Chima. We'll have a section for questions at the end, but let's jump to Sunkami from Haven Hill.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sukomi Dairo. Please confirm if you can hear me.
Yes, we can very well.
Okay, good. So my name is Sukomi. I work as a business development associate here at Haven Hill. So I'll just pick the questions one by one and provide responses to them. So to the first question, I would say that generally our experience was good. Prior to the development of the full-scale deployment, I beg your pardon, of the mesh grid, our community engagement team had gone ahead to conduct enumeration. So using the Okra harvest tool, we had recorded the details of all of our customers and already assigned tariffs or energy packages to them. So during the deployment, during the installation phase, what we did, in line with Okra's SOP, was just to scan the systems and simply allocate them to the customers. So it's really made our work easier. And as well, thanks to the Okra team, prior to the deployment of the project, they came over to our warehouse and trained our engineers on how to handle the equipment. So that's made the installation pretty smooth for us. The next question on how our team managed customer engagement and education in the community. So the engagement process was, that we used on the site where we installed the mesh grid is pretty similar to our SOP for engaging new communities. So just as Chima said, power communities were set up. We took adequate care to ensure that different religions within the community, was represented, gender, etc., and age groups, to ensure that all of them were well represented in the community. Now, what we did differently was to go further, because mesh grids are quite different from mini grids. So because the mesh grids here, the components are going to be installed at each consumer's location. The panels are going to be roof mounted on, residences or the shops of our customers. We had to inform the customers, get their consent to install the solar panels, and as well reassure residential customers that that are still in the cluster that regardless of whether or not the panels are installed on their roofs, they would still be connected to the closest installation. So that was how we conducted customer engagement at our mesh grid sites. Now, on to the next question about the specific factors such as geography or community site that make the mesh grid more or less viable. Well, just as Chima said, one thing that can improve the viability of the mesh grid is to ensure that the systems are designed to power productive use customers. So it's important that this is, taken into consideration in the improvements that are planned for the mesh grids. One other thing that, and I'm just going to merge this with the challenges. One, so to speak, a challenge that we faced is that you would recognize that unlike the mini grids, where either you have a single power station where you provide access to the internet, because I should just say it here because I believe not everyone on this call knows what a mesh grid or a mini grid is. So for a mini grid, the grid is smart. Mesh grid to that grid is also smart. But unlike mini grids, for a mini grid, you only provide internet access to maybe a single base station, or you install perhaps 5, 6, depending on the size of the community, 5, 6 data concentrators, and give them access to the internet to make the grid smart. But unlike that, for mesh grids, you have to provide internet access for each of the installations. So in a community where the access to internet is not uniformly distributed, this can be a little bit challenging when it comes to ensuring that the systems communicate regularly with the cloud. So that's just one simple challenge that we faced. The last question here has to do with improvement. Okay, so what improvements or support would help us scale or developer scale mesh grids? So one major improvement, before I share this, kudos to the Okra team. One major improvement that we shared with them and they were able to rectify within a very short period of time was the issue that okay, let me explain it this way. People often say that smart grids report data in real time, but that's not exactly accurate. So usually there are intervals of time when the communication takes place. At the point when we installed the mesh grids, communication with the cloud was once daily. So every 24-hour cycle, the systems would communicate with the cloud. So it's during this period that billings happen, that the systems also push out consumption data, to the cloud. This was a little bit problematic, that 24 hours is really such a long time for a smart grid to communicate data. But this has now been changed. It's gone down now from 24 hours to 1 hour. So every hour, every 60 minutes, the system communicates with the cloud. So this is an improvement that has already been implemented, by the Okra team. But just to say just one last thing before I close, I think we would, in our opinion, we would say that the jury is still out on the the actual cost competitiveness of mesh grids, given that all factors are taken into consideration. So we believe it's one thing that can be improved on. Nevertheless, it's a proven technology that can truly bridge the energy access gap in rural Nigeria, particularly for clusters where the national grid or the mini grid is not able to reach. So I believe I've now answered all of the questions now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sunkami. We really appreciate. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Please hold your questions for the end. We'll be moving now to our technology partner, who was Okra Solar, and we'll have Afnan come up. So Afnan, you can start with an introduction, and then we can jump into the questions.
Okay, wonderful. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Nice. Awesome. So, yep, brief introduction. My name is Afi. I'm the CEO at Okra Solar. So thanks CrossBoundary Innovation Labs and NG and Haven Hill. It was awesome to get the pilot projects deployed with you guys and to see all the data. Happy to answer any questions here.
Yeah, thank you, Afnan. So our first question for you was, we just wanted to know, what are the operational or deployment challenges you've observed across different regions, knowing that you've worked in Nigeria, Haiti, and many other places, and how has your technology adapted?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we touched on some of them here, and this is actually a great forum to get more feedback and insights, because we're always trying to improve the technology. So I think it was mentioned by Chima that mesh grids are basically interconnected solar home systems. The reason why it's been built this way from the start is that by consuming most of the power where it's generated and only sharing the excess energy between one system to the next, we can take distribution costs down by about 90%. So that was like the main premise of the mesh grid. Let's put all the money into batteries and panels and not into distribution. But one of the things that we observed when we deployed in Haiti with Alina Energy is that there were about 5%, so I'll give you guys some data, there were about 5% of users who were using more than 15 kilowatt hours a month. And these were really like the commercial or the profitable consumers to reach. Then there was another 15% of users using more than 5 kilowatt hours a month. And they were basically like, break even / slightly profitable users. But then there were 80% of users who were using less than 5 kilowatt hours a month. And they were therefore basically like loss-making users. So a couple of years ago, after we observed this data, that's when the hub and spoke topology came out. So we're like, okay, let's just place the assets, the PV and the batteries on the 20% of users that are going to be commercial users, that are profitable users, and then take the excess energy out to what is now the spoke users, the residential users that have very low load. So the connection cost to them is just a little bit of cable and a smart meter. So it's within like the tens of dollars to connect those users, which makes them profitable to serve. So that's one of the lessons. And then another big one, which was highlighted, I think, by Sunkami, is the connectivity challenge. So we've seen this in Haiti as well, and Sunkami highlighted it. So with all of the smart devices needing to connect to the cloud, in places where there's no reliable connectivity, you actually have significant revenue losses. So in Haiti, we've seen more than 30% of the revenue dropping just because the devices aren't connected. So that's really, really bad for our customer, Alina Energy. And what we've done is we've created a device or a technology basically called OkraNet, and it leverages radio on every single device. So if any device isn't online, it can hop that data to the next device, and there only needs to be basically one area in the community which has connectivity, and then you can send that data up into the cloud. So we've kind of addressed that issue now going ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Afnan. So the next one, this was more from one of our participants who was just curious. What does energy storage look like in the context of mesh grids? Because with mini grids, we understand you have the batteries, you have the diesel generators. Yeah, what does mesh grids look like?
Yeah, great question. So kind of going off the hub and spoke analogy that I shared with you guys, Where there's a commercial user, which let's say approximately it's about 20% of users in the community that are, either like a shop front or a pharmacy, or they're just consuming enough energy to really make it worthwhile to connect them. Roughly, there's about 20% of these users. They are the ones that have both PV installed on the rooftop, but also a battery. Currently, we're optimizing around 1.28 and 2.56 kilowatt hour LFP batteries. So yeah, there's a battery installed at these what we call hub connections, and then that will connect through with a cable to the nearest hub connection as well. And so whenever there's excess energy at one hub, it'll share it to the nearest hub. And each hub is also usually connected to about 4 residential consumers nearby who only take excess energy, but they don't supply any energy because they don't have any batteries on the premises.
Awesome, thanks. And on to our last question. Yeah, so we just wanted to know what the future upgrades or innovations Okra is exploring. Yeah, I know you're doing the stacked pod system. Yeah, well, what are you looking at to support more PUE, growing loads, and higher capacity connections?
Yeah, nice. I can see from the discussion today that there's been a lot of mention about PUE. Also, I think Chima mentioned like sub 250 connection sites are the best sites to hit. And obviously with mesh grids, we don't want to just drop the cost. We don't want to just make it easier to deploy. We need to actually make it, again, to quote Chima, he said, the business is not there to dance, but it needs to make money. And if the productive users are going to be making the developers money, we have to have a solution for that. So I think that's what we've learned from the mini grid developers, that productive use is key. And I think we've learned from mesh grids that, hey, we can reduce the distribution cost massively by consuming where the demand is, and then sharing over kind of short distances, as opposed to the mini grid, which sends 100 or tens or hundreds of kilowatts down a single distribution line. So what we're doing going ahead to address this is actually before that, I'd also like to mention on the productive use side, like the mini grid also has some, while it has a lot of benefits to being able to send all of that power through the line, there's also some drawbacks, right? So if your powerhouse is on one side of the community and you have productive use nearby, then that's great. But if you have a lot of productive use turning on simultaneously, then you can basically trip the inverter capacity and then the grid would go down. The entire grid would go down. So all the connections would go down. And then on the other side, if you have productive use on one end of the community, which is on the other end of the powerhouse, then the voltage drop could actually make it unusable for the productive use. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of technological learnings from the deployments that have taken place. So the exciting thing that we're exploring already, but it's going to take some time to get to like mass production, is actually the limitation that we have of the 1.2 kilowatt inverter. We can see the market has moved already towards like much larger hybrid inverters that have come down in cost point massively. There's like 5 kilowatt, 10 kilowatt, 20 kilowatt hybrid inverters. So the next generation of the mesh grid that will be looking to deploy in 2026 will include some of these hybrid inverters. So if you've got a PU that's a grain mill, like you mentioned, that's like 6 kilowatts or kilowatts, then you can plug in the hybrid inverter, serving that really high productive use, and you still benefit when there's excess energy. You share it over a lighter and lower cost distribution line. There's another cool one, but I don't know if I have time to share it. So I'll...
Yeah, yeah, you have 1 more minute.
1 more minute. Okay, cool. So I think it's not like, of course, the hardware is incredibly important. We need to get the CapEx down. We need to be able to serve productive use, but we can't also just have a race to the bottom in terms of CapEx cost. There needs to be ARPU that's coming in, right? And that's what the mini grid guys have done well on, like focusing around productive users. What we're doing at Okra, in addition to the hardware, is software. So we know that about 30% of revenue is also lost from households just not topping up. So we're deploying an end user app that enables their households to check their balance and top up automatically using mobile money, along with incentives on the end user app. And also we've deployed a pilot plugging in third-party productive use appliance suppliers into the grids that are deployed. So in a community, you can see appliances from multiple suppliers and then pick that, get it on financing, and it will get delivered to the community. So there's a bunch to do on the software side as well to keep these grids profitable and sustainable.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Afi. Yeah, thank you for the good insight on mesh grids and what's coming up next. Yeah. So for our next section, we'll be moving to the investor viewpoint. And here we'll be inviting Stuart Hicks and Tombo to lead us through.
Awesome. Thanks, Alida. And Stuart, I guess you're on the line. I will hand it over to you to introduce yourself shortly. But as you introduce yourself, I think I can ask the first question, essentially. We premised this discussion on the fact that, mini grids, or to provide energy access generally, if the private sector is going to be involved, these technologies have to be financially viable. Mesh grids, we see, present an opportunity for reduced cost per connection. But, as we have heard, there's a lot of, outstanding factors, ability to hold higher PUE loads. There's changing technology around the software and updates to the cloud. There's a lack of clarity around some of the regulation. So, as an investor, we would love to hear off the bat, how do you think about mesh grids in this context of energy access, and how does this feed into your thesis of what you do and do not invest in for energy access? So over to you, Stuart.
Okay, so can you hear me? Is that coming through?
Yep.
Yep, okay, great. Okay, so I'm working for Bamboo Capital Partners. Just to give you a bit of background on my experience. So Bamboo Capital Partners, it's a European-based company, but we're implementing largely off-grid energy and clean cooking programs, mainly World Bank financed in Haiti, Madagascar, Mozambique, Burundi, Niger. So on that, we've financed, as has been pointed out, mesh grid in Haiti and also mini grids in Haiti, and in Madagascar we've currently done some mini grids and looking to increase that to more innovation, including mesh grids in Madagascar, and then also possibly in Mozambique, depending on the appetite of the government as well, who we have to work with on these programs. So I guess the question you were asking is really just this viability. I mean, first of all, I have to say that even on the mini grids, it's usually a bit of a struggle to convince yourself that the financial viability is there. As you say, you need about at least 12%, and at 12% you need to have a fairly secure view of the demand. One of the issues then when we look at these typical programs is the average revenue producer in the areas which so far are not being electrified. So remember, we're talking about more rural areas. Certainly a lot of it has ARPUs of around $7 per month, and that's consistent with some of the data from AMDA as well. If you then just go through the maths, you need at least $600 of subsidies, and you're making a series of assumptions of growth and productive use to make it pay. So yes, we see mesh grids as one way to make this more financially viable, just because it reduces the capital cost, which in any infrastructure project, capital cost is a big element of the viability of the program. And I think also most of these only work, the programs, if there's a decent number of connections forward, is the level of grants that we would see going forward is going to drop from the $600. I don't see any way around that, because if you look at, there's another probably 120 million households need electrifying. If you do that at $600 a connection, that gives you $72 billion. I just don't see that level of grants being available. But I think the whole industry is going to have to look at a much more cost-effective solution, which means that the capital employed has to be really geared to a minimum and making sure that every dollar of that capital employed is earning its keep. So that's, I guess, one of the issues we're looking at. And to me, we're just, as an investor, totally technology neutral. We see mesh grids in those areas where a mesh grid will supply the electricity that's required. If that is, and that to me is always where you would start from and go as a first solution. If the mesh grid cannot work because the level of demand is very high, or it's, if you're in the middle of a town, clearly the roof space may be inadequate to make generate the electricity very locally. And so under those circumstances, you have to ship electricity in from some distance, which requires an AC grid, the only way around it. So I guess that's what we're looking at. It's just when we're as investors, we're looking at the viability of the model, and at the current levels of high capex and rural ARPUs, we see mesh grids as the most likely solution for many of those applications because of the lower level of capital expenditure that's required.
Thanks, Stuart. So yeah, I mean, given that, we have established that capex is materially cheaper for mesh grids, for the connections that it provides in a hub and spoke model for the set amount of capacity. Looking ahead and thinking long term in terms of if these investments are going to be performing as they are in 10 years. Looking at challenges around how governments and communities might perceive mesh grids compared to mini grids. How do you take those factors into consideration as you are investing in your wider portfolio?
I mean, that's clearly an issue. There's still quite a bit of feedback you get from governments that, quote, real electricity needs large poles and AC distribution, and anything less is second-class electricity. Now, that is unfortunately still a perception in a number of governments, and that certainly, it makes you nervous. Now, there's a bit of a counterbalance to that, because if it's a mini grid, the mini grid looks, feels and is like the national grid, in which case people are upset if the tariffs are not the same as the national grid. They think they're getting the national grid, so they should pay the same. There's almost a bit of a help that the mesh grid's viewed as something different, and therefore the tariffs are a bit different, so that helps a bit. But I mean, you're right, we need a bit more mesh grids put into place. And I think to figure out as well how these work, because again, I'll say, as investors, you look at the most cost-effective solution. So to us, that's probably at the moment a mixture of mesh grids plus some standalone what's normally referred to as C&I, sort of commercial industrial and to me that's just another example of a distributed generation. If the distributed generation is on one large facility, then that to me is a little bit of distributed generation, which is all part of the sort of concept of getting generation and usage as co-located as possible to drive down the cost of distribution.
Thanks.
What can I say on that? And yes, I mean, a lot, which I think I was saying at the time I got cut off, is that most of these need a significant quantity of connections, probably 20,000, 30,000 connections to make viable businesses. So again, you're having to make an estimate as to what level of subsidy there will be in the future in order to get up to that level of connections. And I say our expectation is that the subsidy levels will decline over time because funding generally worldwide is being cut back, unfortunately, but that's the case. That's the world we're living in.
Yeah. So maybe to end your question, Stuart, so what evidence do you need to see from the lab? What do we need to be testing with developers and others to drive more investment into mesh grids? I mean, I've heard, you are trying to assess sort of these hybrid models of, mesh grids plus standalone, what that looks like. Obviously, we are testing as well PUE, hopefully in the coming months, as the Okra team and other technology suppliers work on that. But in the interim, what would you advise us to sort of focus on in terms of evidence that investors need to put more money behind mesh grids and drive energy access?
And one of the key ones is certainly, which I know Okra is working on, is this connectivity with the internet, which has been a particular problem in Haiti because of the violence and disruption. The telecom network is seriously deteriorated. So that's one that we've just got to get that right, because nobody's going to invest in a grid with 30% of your customers can't buy electricity from it. This whole PUE is an interesting one as to how fast that can be developed. The experience again in Haiti is that we tried to do some financing schemes by ALENA. To be honest, we overestimated ability to pay. So quite a number of customers put in the standard fridges, freezers, etc., and then defaulted on payment. So the payment rate has been pretty poor and certainly not economic for a business. That's why trying to get this balance right between taking what people will afford pretty soon and how fast you're going to predict what they will go to in the future. And we've been unfortunately disappointed with the lack of growth. So I guess for us, and to come back to your question, is just more experience of the economics of these mesh grids working, whether they can generate the 12% returns and what level of subsidies are required to make that work. And the more data you can share on that what ARPUs people are getting, if people have some innovative schemes to encourage productive use equipment, what particular pieces of productive use equipment have worked well. Some of the issues with a lot of people focus on agricultural stuff, so mills. I mean, some of the problems there, and again, we'd be interested in feedback, is that these tend to be seasonal. And so if you get peaks seasonally, that's not great for any solar system. The solar system is all capex up front. So ideally, you want steady demand throughout the whole year. to some extent, diesel generator sets work better for seasonal because your capex is much lower, your opex may be higher, but because you're only using it for a short period each year, that might be the most cost-effective solution. So I think yes, work around there just as to how that balances. But I mean, generally, I'm optimistic because the key thing is the cost of batteries and solar panels continues to drop. The cost of distribution, poles, wires, cables, continues to increase. So the balance to getting more distribution and more co-location of generation and consumption is only going to get stronger in the future. Okay, that's all from me, I think.
Yeah, no, thanks, Stuart. Thanks for that. Very handy. And yeah, it is optimistic generally that costs are falling, and I think developers broadly are getting better at deploying productive use equipment and understanding the community needs. So we hear from you that evidence that is needed is this performance over time, how mesh grids perform, how the consumption is over time. You already mentioned the point about connectivity that Okra is already working on. So yeah, we as a lab will continue to work with our partners on this, and as Halida said, we'll invite everyone on this call to collaborate with us on that. But with that, I can hand back to Halida. I think the next phase is questions from the audience, which I'm sure there's many. So Halida, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tombo and Stuart, for freestyling. So let me jump through your questions. I think you covered everything very well. Yeah, so right now we are in the open discussion. So just want to get Q&A, thoughts, feedback from you. We had compiled a couple of leading questions just to hear your thoughts on this, like what stands out to sector players. Yeah, how could mesh grids enhance what you're already doing? Are mesh grids a viable addition to your portfolio? And what challenges would you face in piloting mesh grids? Yeah, so also looking at the policy or regulatory shifts that you think would support them, and what additional data would just help strengthen confidence. So you could use the raising hand signal on Teams if you just have thoughts or questions. Yeah, so our developers and partners and everyone is here to just answer questions. Yeah, thanks, Mikey. Yes, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Miki Lazar, Director with Odin Solutions Limited. We started to promote in Nigeria a combination of electric microtransport, the EKK, as the Nigerians knows, in connectivity with the mini grids. Now, from our assessment, the electric microtransport can be a substantial anchor, creating a base load demand for any power generation. And I wanted to ask Okra team how they see the possibility to create charging kiosks that will charge an electric KK based on the mesh mesh grid. I think something like the surplus that can be from all the households to be stored in a battery and then with an inverter to charge the EKK. On the other side around, we deploy a centralized charging facility that has already capacities, and we can be very interested in deploying mesh grids around that location in the households around, providing a solution for electrification at that community. So I would appreciate Okra team opinions, views on this thing. Thank you.
Nice. Thanks, Mickey. What's the power rating of the charging for your EKK?
Around 2.5 kilowatt charger.
2.5 kilowatt charger. Okay, cool. So I think that's definitely an interesting use case. Under the current model, it would not work. As discussed, there was a demand for like higher power use for productive use. And I think Stuart highlighted like, where are these productive uses? Are they always there? And so what you guys are doing would be great to plug in, because that's an example of a useful productive use. In order for us, for the mesh grid to be able to supply that, we'd need to move to that hybrid inverter model that we plan on rolling out next year. But yeah, definitely keen to kind of pilot it with you guys if that's interesting. And in terms of like application as well, right? Like I was speaking to Daniel from First Electric, I think he's on the call. But yeah, he was talking about like in the next generation of his mesh grids as well, being able to put that excess power into these e-mobility use cases and then actually transport that excess energy from one mesh grid to another when there's need for it. So yeah, I think we could pilot something really, really cool at some point next year.
Okay, we have an operation in Nigeria called Janus, or a brand called Jigo, JGO, and we start to deploy what we call as this Sunbread, the charging facilities. So we will be very interested to deploy mesh grids around these anchor power capacities in order to electrify the environment of such charging facility, especially in the rural context.
Okay, thank you so much, Mickey. Yeah, looks like PUE will be a big topic and big load for Okra Solar going forward. Yeah. Anyone else with questions or thoughts? Yeah, Rumbi.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rumbi Zaibere. I am with International Power Control Systems in Malawi. I missed the early section of the discussion. What I wanted to find out is Okra in terms of operation. Do they also supply to Malawi?
Okay, yep, cool. I can take that. Unfortunately, currently we're not supplying to Malawi. We're only in 2 countries, Haiti and Nigeria. But yeah, please shoot me an email and we can get in touch to see if we can do something there together. And I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay, then.
Thanks, Afi. Maybe you can expand. Do you supply based on orders? Like, is it guaranteed that wherever in the world someone needs mesh grids, you'll be able to go?
Yeah, it's a great question. So currently we don't. That's definitely the vision of the company and where we have to go, you know, in order to be part of Mission 300 and solving this huge problem of almost 700 million people without access to electricity. But currently we're quite hands-on with like training and support for the developers to make sure that all the projects get deployed effectively. So we're limiting the market reach, but in 2027, we're planning on expanding to like over 10 new markets, with the first pilots actually happening in 2026.
Awesome, thank you. We also have a hand raised from Parfait.
Yes, thank you for the questions, for the opportunity. My name is Parfait, so I'm a researcher in microgrid. So yeah, I would like just to ask a question, but it's more a technical question about, you know, any issue of stability that you have encountered, especially in the operation, because I know that mesh grids may use DC systems, especially for small systems. So, and with DC, sometimes we have, you know, with constant power load, actually it's producing instability. So have you ever recorded any instance of instability in the operation? And my second question is about the standard. So are there any, let's say, grid code standards for that you comply with for your mesh grid, especially in country where you are operating? So yeah, thank you.
Nice, thanks Parfait for the technical question. So actually the reason, So firstly, on the load side, it's all AC. So imagine at every household's premises, there's a meter and a AC inverter. So the household is always getting an AC load. Where the DC comes in is actually on the distribution side. And so imagine you have like all of these interconnected generators, solar generators. As soon as you're decentralizing everything and then you're getting them to interconnect, you're reducing the total power that goes over the line, you're reducing the distance that the power goes over the line. So you can automatically significantly reduce the conductor size, which was our goal, to basically reduce the distribution cost. So now the question is like, go DC distribution or AC distribution? And actually what we found was that the AC distribution, when you're doing it in a decentralized way, it gets quite complicated because you're having to match the frequency and phase of, you know, tens or hundreds of distributed generators. And that actually leads to a lot of complications, especially when the loads also get, you know, quite nasty, where you have like a massive load coming on all at once, like a phone charging station where they have like 200 phones that are charging at a single time. I'll just quickly wrap up with this. On the DC side, how the distribution works is quite a simple algorithm where when there's a hub that wants to share power, it just signals to the grid, because our grid is always operating at around 50 volts. So it just signals to the grid like 52 volts. And that signals that, okay, it has excess energy. And on the other side, if somebody or if a node needs to pull power, it signals low voltage, like 48 volts to the grid. And then the power just starts sharing. So by connecting on that DC line, there's actually no real complications. You just connect to the line where you want to share, and there's really no instability. It's completely stable system. Yeah, but again, feel free to just shoot me a message if you want to dig in deeper on that one.
Okay. Thanks,
Yeah,
Afi.
thank you.
And we have one more hand raise, Tilen.
And also, Afi, he had asked about the grid code standards that you comply with. Maybe just briefly touch on that before. Tilen.
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder there, Tombo. So just briefly, because these systems on the distribution side are all SCLV, so safe extra low voltage, which is less than 60 volts DC. And as I mentioned, we're operating at 50 volt DC on the distribution line. So it does not need to adhere to the grid code because it's not considered like the national electricity grid or a mini grid. But we do still have to comply to a set of requirements and protection requirements that have been set by the REA under the DARES program in Nigeria. So if you look into that, because there's AC loads at the household, there still needs to be earthing, there still needs to be MCBs and a lightning protection. So all of that is still implemented. And again, if you're interested, I can share with you the site-specific requirements so you can check out the technical details. Long, 150-page document that you'll probably enjoy.
Okay, thanks, Afi. Tilen?
Thanks for this opportunity. My question actually, and perhaps I need to introduce myself. My name is Tilen Ogola and I represent Masiko. We operate a couple of mini grids in Ethiopia, targeting mostly displaced setting. And to the Okra team, I think my question would be more on the numbers. Looking at the example you had in Haiti, where I think initially the distribution layout was changed to your current layout where you're thinking about more spoke and hub, and you talked about significant reduction in the capex, right? And initially you gave us figures around perhaps 15 kilowatt per month being more profitable. And I think my question is more around, based on that iteration, what are the specific viable numbers in terms of consumption that you're now seeing in some of your site or projects? I know demand assessment is not that straightforward, but I ask this question, for the sake of just trying to understand the OPEX recovery now with this new reduction. Did I make sense?
Yep, that made sense. I think sorry, I was just doing the calculation in my head from the latest model. Yeah, so basically, and I'm not the best because we're the technology supplier, right? The developers like Haven Hill, actually, who are on this call, who've done a massive number of deployments, and also First Electric, that would be good to answer this if you want to get some more info from them. But Brett, from my side, because we're working with a lot of our partners to actually help them get their portfolios financed as well, you're looking at a minimum of 4,000 Naira per month average revenue per user, as like really the minimum, which is like $3.50 average revenue per user per month. And if you're not able to hit that, then you should really evaluate the site selection that's been done there. And then when you can start ramping up to like double that, then you're actually looking at IRRs that are significantly higher than what Halida and Tombo mentioned at the start of the presentation. You're looking at like 15-20% plus IRRs in Nigeria with the $300 per connection grant that's coming through. So I think now the time is really for the market to focus on, okay, how can we boost the revenue? And there's so many things. Like, one is we have to fix the connectivity because that's causing losses. The other thing is like top-ups. Like if households aren't topping up, then you're just losing revenue. And the third one is, I think, appliance finance and productive use. And yeah, the developers are just getting better and better at stimulating that load. Like, I don't know if anyone from Haven Hill is happy to share as well, but they've done a lot of really cool experiments in how can you actually bring productivity to the communities, which I think we all need to learn from, no matter what the technology is.
Thanks. Sunkami, any thoughts? I can see you're still on the call. We have 2 minutes, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Okay. So I'm not sure I heard his questions. I know so could you please just check to see if I'm correct? He asked about the ARPU and what we're doing with productive use, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So the ARPU would really depend on the profile of the community, right? So for community less than 200 or 250 customers, I think the ARPU there would be somewhere between 4,000 to maybe 7,000 naira or 10,000 naira per user. So somewhere around that would be a really good figure. And yes, so typically communities that are this size, you should be looking at getting at least 15% of the customers using the electricity 15 to 25% of the customers using the electricity for productive use. So that would also be a good number to guide your expectation and to guide the any intervention that you want to use to stimulate demand. So I don't know, have I answered your question now?
Yeah, super clear, and thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. We're almost at time. We just have 1 minute before the webinar ends, but just wanted to know if there's any burning question or we can close it here.
I think let's close it here, Rita. Maybe you can just wrap up.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, everyone. So in terms of if you need to reach the lab, here are emails. Yeah, you can reach out to Tombo or I or Minikrit Lab at CrossBoundary. But apart from that, we just wanted to say thank you so much for setting aside time on a Friday evening, yeah, just to learn more about mesh grids and just hear from us and the different partners. Yeah, thank you to the partners at T, Bushan, and I think I saw Andy also on the call, yeah, from Carbon Trust. Thank you so much for your support, yeah, and looking forward to connecting more. as we continue learning how to scale mesh grids. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Great job. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.